We are in a place where repurposing content just doesn't do the same things that it used to. It doesn't have the same result as it used to, and we have to think more creatively. And today, that is what we are going to talk about. Podcast Growth Nation, today for episode number 194, an easy way to get social media content from every episode you do. So I have been doing something relatively new, but I've done it in the past. I've just been doing it more lately, where I do what we call live produce episodes. So I have clients that really would benefit from doing more solo episodes, but they don't necessarily know where to start. So I literally go into StreamYard with them. I help them with the scripts and the titles and the hooks and all that, and then I kind of live produce the episode. And what we do at the end has been super helpful for them as well as us if we're helping them with this, but for their social media. So what most people are doing right now is they're doing an episode, and then in their mind, the podcast episode is done, and then we can repurpose content from there. This is what I would do out there because I guarantee it's probably going to have better results than you're having right now. When you're done with your episode, I want you to record a 60-second podcast episode about the podcast episode you just recorded, especially if you're doing solos. Especially. Hook, story, lesson, future pace, call to action. That is what you do. You can kind of get rid of the call to action if you want, because the point is to make it valuable. So the point is not to necessarily talk about the episode. Or let me put it this way. The point is not necessarily to get people to the episode. That's not necessarily the point. The point is to create a valuable piece of content that is standalone content for social media. So let's say, let's say you do the top 5 reasons people struggle to save money, right? That's the episode. Let's say you do a 15-minute episode. It's a solo episode. Awesome. What people usually do is they go and they try to repurpose that episode. But if you sat down and said, okay, I did this in 15 minutes and I talked about 5 points, let me create a 60-second script and I can talk about 1 point, the main point. And you do a hook. This is the number one reason you cannot save money. Or this is the number one reason most people can't save money. That's the hook. The story is, I was working with a client recently who blah, 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 blah. The lesson is they have 15 subscriptions and they didn't know about 13 of them. That's what most people are dealing with right now. And then if you want to have the call to action at the end, you can say, I dove much deeper into this and I have a list of other reasons. Check out the podcast episode for all of them, right? You can do that, but the goal is to make the content stand alone by itself. And this is one of the hard things about repurposing content is you have to always think it has to be able to stand alone by itself. Because 99% of people, more than that, 99.9% of people who see your social media content are not going to consume the episode. It has to stand alone. And that's where a lot of people, I know of like very seasoned podcasters who are hundreds of episodes in that are just throwing their videos into Opus Clip and just throwing stuff out there. There's not enough context. It doesn't stand alone. It doesn't solve a problem on social media. It's a different platform. So it has to be treated differently. So this is something that you can do easily with solo episodes. What you can do with guest episodes, it's a little bit more complicated because obviously the goal is to highlight the guest. But you could very easily do a social media story. Same thing. Hook. Story is going to be about the guest. Lesson is going to be from the guest. And then the call to action is going to be check out the full episode. So you could say same episode, right? 5 reasons most people struggle to save money, hypothetically. The hook is going to be different because it's not you saying the value. But did you realize most people have 15 subscriptions that they're paying for and they don't even know it? I didn't realize that either until I talked to Blank today on episode number blah, 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 blah. We went deep into so many other things about where people are just losing money and the 5 biggest reasons it's so hard to save money. If you're trying to save money and you want a deep dive, check out the episode, right? Boom. Now, it has to be of value, though. So you have to give something. So give the number one reason and then let people journey to the full podcast for the other four. But if you're creating content that is taken from the middle of the episode and there's no context, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't. Imagine if, I don't know, you see clips from movies all the time on social media. If you haven't seen the movie, you don't have the full context. You don't really know what's happening. You don't really get it. So there has to be a start, a middle, and an end. And it doesn't have to be the start, the middle, and the end of the podcast episode. It has to be the start, the middle, and the end of social media content. It's a completely different game. That's part one. Part two, the attention retention is super low. So I'm pretty sure it's like, I saw a stat the other day, I think you have like 1.8 seconds to hook somebody. On social media, it's really hard to do that with something that's repurposed if it's not professionally repurposed, right? So if you're a good video editor, sure, you can do this. You can take it and you can find a hook and you can do the zoom and the music and the sound effects. You can do all that. Opus Clip and these repurposed places are not going to be able to do it like that. Eventually, they probably will. But until then, you have to get creative. So that's a piece of it. And then the thought process is how many days, how many weeks, how many months is it between when you record the episode and when it actually goes live with the content you create? Every time you record an episode, you have, theoretically, a post and or story for that day. And this forces you to get comfortable talking in front of the camera. This forces you to get comfortable being the person and putting your face out there. And you're going to get way better at speaking. That's something I'm seeing very, very often is people are not improving their speaking skills because everything is repurposed. Everything. We're just repurposing stuff, which is great. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I think it should be supplemental. I don't think it should be everything, right? I don't think repurposed content is usually very valuable unless somebody professional is doing it. Then it can obviously be better. But that is an easy way to get at least one piece of content from every episode you do at the time of doing the episode. So this is what my clients will do. They'll record a 20-minute episode with their normal setup, however they're doing it, and then they will literally take their phone and then they'll do a 1-minute version of that episode. Hook, story, lesson, call to action if you want. But worst case, hook, story, lesson, conclusion. That's like the simplest frame, right? For those that might be new and haven't heard about and or heard the episode where we talked about the solo episode framework, hook is something that gets people to stop scrolling. Story is usually the pain you experience before you get the lesson. The lesson is the value. The future pace is what your life looks like and feels like after the lesson. And then the call to action is where do people go next, right? So that's kind of the original framework. This one, hook, story, lesson, and then you can just have a conclusion. So wrap it up. Just wrap it up. In this case, the story doesn't have to be life before the lesson. The story could be whatever. You can use the same story you used in the podcast episode if you want. You just got to make it shorter, right? So it doesn't always have to be the pain before the lesson and then the pleasure after the lesson. It doesn't have to be that. Again, if you go on YouTube and search infomercials, and almost every one is set up this way. The hook is, oh no, not again, I burnt my eggs, whatever. That's the hook. The story is, this person was making eggs for their family and they screwed up dinner and now their entire family hates them because they burnt their eggs. That's a story. All right, hook story. Lesson is, we have a pan that's non-stick that'll make all your problems go away. Future pace is the weird smile they have on their face when they're making eggs that aren't sticking to the pan. And then the call to action is buy now, right? But wait, there's more. If you buy within the next 15 minutes, we'll give you 7 pans. That's the call to action. So that's kind of where it came from. Like that's, if you look at infomercials, it's a really good hook story lesson, for lack of better phrasing. But this is going to force you to get good at this. And I'm telling you, this is like a really important skill that carries over to other skills, because as a podcast guest, what are you going to do? When somebody asks you a question, you want to be able to do hook, story, lesson. Hook, story, lesson. And it's easier to do that if you've been practicing it for a long period of time. So I'm always trying to do that, right? It's easier said than done. But a hook pulls people in. It keeps people engaged. It keeps people interested. A story, you cannot teach a lesson without a story, and you shouldn't have a story without a lesson, is the thought process. And then at least, we want to make sure that there's a lesson there. We want to make sure that there's value there. So if I was going to do a 1-minute clip on today's episode, I might do, I guess that's a new word I'm going to use. I might do something like, what if everything you thought you learned about repurposing content was wrong? That would be my hook. My story would be, one of the things I've been working on a lot with my clients recently is helping them get micro content from their long form content. And I did that recently with this person, and this is what happened, blah, blah, blah. That's the story. The lesson is, in 60 seconds, you can essentially get a piece of content from every episode. And then the conclusion is, throw that into your workflow. Every time. You can do that with a solo episode. You can do that with a guest episode. If you want to take it a step further, you could literally do this with your guest. Have a guest on, do your episode, and then get to the end and say, hey, I really like to try this thing at the end of the episode called a 60-second podcast. And I would love for you to just explain what we talked about in 60 seconds and just give us like the big idea. You could do that for sure. And I'm willing to bet that will be a pretty decent clip depending on the quality of the guest, right? Not everybody can just hammer one, but it's worth trying. It's worth trying. As we get more into automation with everything, the stuff that isn't automated is going to be more valuable, right? So you can throw a link into Opus Clips or whatever you're using, and it'll pull out some content. But it's not, I'm telling you, it's not going to be as good as if you just practiced and did it yourself. I am certain of that, because the context is different. If I said you have an hour to talk about this thing, that is a completely different approach than if I said you have 60 seconds to talk about this thing. If you have 60 seconds, you have to go, and you have to go quick. If you have an hour, you can take your time. So what do you think is going to be better? I think the 60-second clip that you're creating for a specific platform is always going to outperform something that's repurposed. Always. Always, 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 always. But it's harder. And it takes time, and it takes prep work, and it takes facing our ego if we're not good at it yet. But repurpose, you hit a button, and it creates the quote-unquote best content. That's not true. That's not true. You can get really good at this. And this skill will carry over to many, many, many different arenas. But it just takes time. And it takes sucking at it at first. And it takes the ego bonking and the ego realization that, oh man, maybe I'm not as good at this as I thought. Same. Nobody is at the beginning, right? Unless you're very talented, you just don't know it yet. So that's my takeaway. My takeaway in today's episode, just from a simple, specific use case, is this, what we talked about. But in general, repurposing is most likely going to continue to get less and less valuable because it's going to get easier and easier to do, so everybody else is doing it. Everybody is repurposing, so a lot of the clips you see are just repurposed clips, and they're not really doing anything. But if you look at creators that are doing really well, most of them are creating native content based on the platform. That is I think the level that we should all aspire to get to, right? It would be very easy for us to just have the team repurpose. We do an episode every day. I can have a repurposed piece of content every day. That is not our strategy. To a detriment at this point, because I'm not doing almost anything on social because I'm working so much in the business. But that's the best advice I have. And then eventually it gets to a point where, oh, I don't have anything to post today. All right, let me just hit it. Let me just do a video. A video of you talking. If you can get to the place where that is the easiest thing you can do, you are above 99% of people. There are clients that I've worked with recently who are very new to content creation. And I'm saying this not to poke fun, not to judge. I want you to know what the playing field looks like. It takes some people 15 minutes of practice and messing up and recording to get 1 minute of usable video. 15 minutes to get 1 minute. If it takes you longer, that's okay. I'm not saying you can't improve. But if you're a podcaster, I'm willing to bet it won't take you that long. A 15-to-1 ratio. You get that down to, it takes me 3 tries. I give myself 3 tries and I get a minute out of that. All right, cool. I'm going to do that. You get there, you're spending 3 minutes creating a piece of content. Give yourself an hour and you can create 20 pieces of content. That's a very good ROI, and you're going to get better at it. I love automation. I love AI. I'm a fan of the abilities that it provides for me, right? Awesome. And you also have to hone your skills because other people are still honing theirs. Other people are still honing their skills. I don't want you to get your questions from ChatGPT. I think that's dumb as shit. You're not learning. You're not learning how to create good questions. Your captions and stuff, that's different, right? If you want to be the best caption writer ever of all time, I would not use AI. I would do it yourself. Most people don't want to do that. But as an interviewer, as a speaker, I hate when I log onto a podcast and the person's like, yeah, I fed in your information at chat and it gave me some really good questions. I am so turned off by that. So turned off by that. I want to know what you want to ask. I want to know what you think the audience wants to ask. I want to have like a conversation. I don't want AI to come up with the questions, So little rant on that. All right. So the too long didn't listen version is when you get to the end of an episode, hit record on your cell phone and give me 60 seconds of context based on what you just talked about, and understand you got to hook people because social media is drastically different than a long form audio or video consumption. Cool. If you are out there and you don't know where to start with this, or maybe you have other ideas that you want to run by someone who has maybe tested them, I'll have my link below for a free 30-minute podcast breakthrough session. Podcast Growth Nation, our private Facebook group, is doing its thing, so we'll have the link below for that as well. And I hope you're working on honing your skills. I do. Results are awesome. All right, results are awesome. Getting results is great. Practicing skill acquisition and practicing improving your skill set is more valuable than results because they get you results forever. Results are one time. Okay, we had a good month. Awesome. That's a result. What created the good month? Oh, I had a really powerful episode. Awesome. What created the really powerful episode? Probably the stuff behind the scenes that nobody else sees. So I hope you're doing that. I know it's unsexy. I know nobody sees it. I know it seems like it's unrewarding, but the results are a result of the effort you put in. So I hope you are all doing that. Cool. All right, until next week, keep on crushing it, keep on podcasting, and I will talk to you all then.